Hey everyone, Jeffrey Way here. Welcome to this week's Plus tutorial. This one is an important one. It's going to change the way you code your CSS. So what we're going to do here is we're going to learn how to use a tool called CSS Scaffold. So what is it? It's a rapid CSS development framework, but not like you would imagine maybe the 960 or the Blueprint frameworks. Those don't even necessarily qualify as a framework. They're just a collection of classes. Instead, this is a full-blown MVC framework that'll allow you to do as much variables in your CSS. It'll allow you to use functions, things like for statements and nested selectors, expressions. It'll automatically cache. It'll gzip. It'll combine. If you have 5 style sheets, you know how maybe before you deploy a project, you'll have to manually combine all those style sheets into one in order to cut down on HTTP requests. This will do it for you. It's amazing. I promise you, if you are aware of PHP, this is going to change the way you create it. So, first thing you got to do is download the framework. I'm going to have a link to this within the posting you're viewing. Otherwise, let me see if I can just shorten this. You're going to go to wiki.github.com/AnthonyShort/CSS Scaffold. CSS Scaffold. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to come down. If you want, he has a quick tutorial, not really a tutorial as much just an overview of what you can do. Be sure to check that out. And we need to download it. So let's go to the very top and click on Downloads. And you can come to the very top and let's see which one you need. You want the most recent one, so we'll just click on the zip file. Save. And that's going to save it right here. So the first thing you want to do here is, once you've downloaded it, is just change the name to something like Scaffold. Okay. Now, this works off PHP, so you need to make sure it's dragged into where you are storing your htdocs folder. I'm going to make sure I'm running MAMP, so I'm going to load that up. Okay, and open Start Page. Close this out, and now this is my htdocs folder. I'm going to create something called Faster CSS. And within it, I'm going to drag in the Scaffold folder right here. Okay. So the next step, of course, is going to our text editor. I'm going to be using Coda. Okay, let's go to Desktop and Websites and Faster CSS. Okay, so let's create a new folder for CSS, and this is where the Scaffold folder that we just downloaded needs to be stored within CSS. So we'll also create our main index.html. Save that. And we have a couple more things we have to do. Within this scaffold, you're going to have to do 2 things. The first one, mostly you're not going to have to touch these files, although you will be looking at the framework. We need to, this is the config. If you've used a framework like CodeIgniter or CodeIgniter, you should be familiar with this. It has your options that we're going to go over. But first, we're going to rename that to config.php. And then the CSS.htaccess file needs to be dragged into the root of our CSS folder. And also, we are going to remove CSS, so it's just .htaccess. And believe it or not, that's all we need to do. So now we have our CSS folder. Let's create a new style.css and reference it like we normally would. And the href is css/style.css. And let's begin. So those of you who know me pretty well know I'm really addicted to productivity tools. I run CodeCanyon, ThemeForce, and NetTouch, so I really need to be able to do everything as quick as possible. That's why I'm a huge fan of products like Text Expander, the Hit List, Forklift, finding the best code expanding tools, using the best editors. I showed you guys kind of a sample. Let me see if I can go back to it. The other day called Learn How to Write Lightning Fast Code Using Zen Coding. That's another one. These are all important, and every time you can shave even 10 or 20 minutes off your day, it really helps quite a bit, and this is going to take it even a step further. So let's come back and let's create our opening thing. So using the Zen coding, although you don't need to, it's just a way to speed things up. I'm going to create a container and then a P and then some lorem text. Okay, we're all set, and just to make sure everything's running correctly, let's add a style container background, red, and come to our page. And we called it faster CSS, and now we are referencing our CSS. So what we must first do is make sure that CSS scaffold is in fact running. So it was partially ported over from Sass. So the first bare basics of what you can do is create constants. If you've ever, about a year ago, Chris Coyer over on CSS Tricks asked a bunch of designers what they were most hoping for in CSS. And I believe he and I both asked for variables. If you have maybe a dark blue that you're using throughout your whole site, many times if you want to change that to red, you have to search through every instance of that hex value. You can do a find and replace, but you know what I mean. And it's a drag. It would be great if you could just assign that to a variable, and then every time it's referenced, it just references that variable. And then when you want to change the color, you just change it one time. And it's a lot more convenient. It makes more sense that way. This will give you that ability out of the box. So we're going to create constants. I'm going to comment this out just so it's easier to understand. And we do the @ symbol and then constants, and this is where we add it. So let's do text color, and it's going to be green. Okay, so let's see how we can make this work. Well, we're going to do the p tag, and we're going to do something as simple as color, and we're not just going to do text color like that. We have to prefix it with the exclamation point, which comes over from Sass. So let's save that, and if it's working correctly, that text should now be green. Let's make sure we refresh the page, and it is working. So once again, what is the advantage of that? Well, if we had maybe a heading 1 tag, we could do the same thing, color, text color. And let's make sure we actually add a heading 1 tag. Okay, so you could be thinking, well, I can just group them together using a comma. Well, that is true, but many times when you have a huge style sheet and you're working within a bunch of nested elements, you don't do that. So you end up having to declare the value so many times. This is a much smarter method. So already you can see if it was just that alone, it would be worth it. You now have variables. It had, it took you 30 seconds to get started, and you're already using constants. You can do anything if you wanted to do BG color, orange, and then once again background, BG color. Done. Very cool. Now, let's say you don't want to declare, maybe you have a constant that you want to persist across every project you do. There are ways where you can actually declare the constants within your projects. So you go into the scaffold. Most of these you won't have to touch, but you will find yourself going into the actual framework. And you can see here it has grids, mix-ins, and we're going to go over a lot of these. But what we need is going to be located within the config.php file. And if you come back here, we're going to go over each of these. I don't want to flood you with information, but there's some things important to know. Auto include mixin, we'll go over that shortly. First one, use CSS constants. So there's actually a proposed syntax, assuming CSS eventually does get variables, of using this method right here. Okay, but instead, CSS scaffold uses the Sass style of prefixing the variable with an exclamation point. So if you set that to true, you would then use this format. I'm fine with it as Sass. Another cool thing is it will minify your code for you. So the first thing I want to show you before we come back is I want you to take a look at the CSS file that's being generated, style.css. Look, it's actually within a CSS folder, isn't it? Okay, so you can see it lets us know it was processed with CSS scaffold, but also it minified it. So although your code looks nice and neat, once it's sent to the browser, all of that white space is removed, which is fantastic. You don't have to worry about doing that on your own. When you deploy your project, it's done for you. But if you want to maybe review it while you're working, all you have to do is set that to false, and now it'll prettify it. So refresh, and now it displays nicely. Pretty neat, huh? Also, you can validate your CSS. You can create constants that live within your config file. So now if we wanted to do BG color, and that's going to be purple, like that. And now we can come back and we can declare it the same way we did before. So I'm going to get rid of BG color and come back refresh the page, and now it's referencing the config file. And that you would want to do that if it's something you're going to have across all your projects, and it just makes more sense for it to live there. That way you don't always have to code that in with every new project. And now, of course, if we refresh the page, you can see that it substitutes purple for the variable. So the next thing I want to show you is you can group multiple style sheets into one very easily. So let's say, because sometimes when you're maybe importing scripts or something like that, you find yourself ending up with like 6 style sheets and you have to import them all into one, and it's just a drag. Let's say we had one called forms or something like that, and whoops. I'm just going to do form, just add some gibberish here. Something like that. Now, if we wanted to refresh the page, you're not going to see any difference because it doesn't do it automatically. But what you can do is like PHP include. So at the very top, what if we just did something like, and it doesn't have to be at the top, but we could do include and then just a path. So it's called forms.css. And once again, I'm going to comment this out. Includes. So now this file will automatically be imported into one single style sheet. Oops. And of course, I'm sorry, we need to close that out with a semicolon. Refresh the page, and now it is importing that. Although when we are working on it, we can still have the advantage of working on separate style sheets to keep things as organized as possible. So now you don't have to worry about the benefits or the cons of maybe having a different style sheet for your typography and a different one for your main information and a different one for anything else. It makes sense this way because you can always include it into one. Very cool. The next thing I want to teach you about is mixins. So what are mixins? Think of mixins in the same way you would think of functions. So let's create our first one. Like functions. Okay, so remember, just think of it like a function. So we're going to start with an equal sign, and let's give it something like buttons will be the name. And you're going to declare it almost like a regular function, except rather than function, you create that equal sign. And let's just do something like, I don't know, if we're going to create a button, we'll have a border, maybe 1 pixel solid, kind of a grayish color, maybe a background, and maybe we should set the background equal to a variable at the top. So let's say background is going to be BG color that we declared within our config.php file. And what else? Let's give it some padding, 1 and make the borders rounded. So Moz border radius is going to be 2 pixels. And let's do the same thing for WebKit border radius. So that by itself isn't going to do anything, of course, because we're not referencing it anyway. And by the way, that looks terrible. Don't do that on your own. It's just for example. So how can we reference this mixin or function that we created? And it's very simple. Let's come back to our page and let's do a horizontal rule, and let's just create an input. So input text, and the name will be the name, ID is name. I'm sorry, we don't want a text box, we want a submit button, right? Submit. Come back, refresh the page, and now we have a button. So what if we want to give all buttons this styling? But what if we also want to apply it to things like maybe an anchor tag that's formatted like a button or other? We could just give this a class and then reference that class, but there could be other uses when it would make more sense to do it this way. So now we have buttons. Let's do this. Input type equals submit. And rather than just pasting that in, because when we could reuse this for other elements on the page, we can simply call that function. And the way we call it is kind of like the opposite of the equal sign. We use plus. So plus buttons. And now let's see what happens. There you go. It's applying all of our background. So you know what I'm going to do here, just because that purple is hurting my eyes. Let's change that to bluish gray, and now you can see there's our button. Pretty simple. But before we move forward, I want to let you know that there are built-in mixins. One of them specifically a built-in button, which means you don't have to create the functions. They've already been created for you, and we will review some of those before the thing is finished. So once again, what's the benefit? Well, we could now let's do another horizontal rule, and href is going to be nowhere, and click me. There's our click me, and let's just give that the button as well. And once again, I'm aware you can add a class, but this way it's a little bit more convenient, I think. So let's do A, and you'd probably want to be more specific with the anchor tag, maybe where it has an href attribute or something like that to designate that it is a button. But for the example, once again, let's give it the buttons function. So this is going to call that, and it's going to apply these properties and values to the anchor tag. And now if I refresh, you're going to see it was given that. Pretty cool. What I'm going to do here is get rid of that, but before we do, I want to show you, remember, this is exporting a regular CSS file when we are finished. So if I refresh the page, you can see that those properties were added. Pretty cool, huh? We can take this a step further. So if we wanted, we could add values that we pass in, just like a regular function. So what if we wanted to pass in the background color for the button? We could just pass in red, something like that. And now this function will accept, or this mixin will accept value. So let's accept red. And remember, even though it's PHP, we're not going to do it like that. We need to do it the Sass style of the exclamation point. And now the background color is going to be, I'm sorry, not red, BG. We'll just do BG. And now replace that with BG. And now if we did it correctly, the button should have a background color of red. And it is, and if we refresh, you can see that that value was replaced with red. Now, what if we, just like a regular function, once again, what if we want to set a default value? What if we still want to have the ability to call the functions without passing in a value? We can, once again, just do bg equals yellow. And now, if nothing is passed in, which overrides that value, it'll be set to yellow. So come back to Firefox, refresh the page, and it does receive that default value of yellow. But just to prove it, if we want to pass in orange instead, orange will then become the default. So now we have variables, and now we have functions in our CSS file to create really flexible programs. Hope you're getting excited about this, because it did definitely with me. So if you're still trying to figure out, like, okay, what would I really use these functions for? If this didn't get you, you could also imagine doing something like a shadow, where you wanted to apply a base shadow to any number of elements. So let's create one. Let's do, and once again, we're going to create this, but I believe there is a built-in mixin for box shadows and things like that. So we're going to call it shadow, =, shadow. And if you know, using the Moz box shadow and WebKit, these are browser specific CSS 3 effects. WebKit box shadow, and then also we would have just the official version box shadow, which is not supported in all browsers. We need to pass in 4 parameters. The first one is the X offset. The second one is the Y offset. The third is the blur. This is all can be in pixels. And the fourth one is going to be the color of the shadow. So we need to make sure that we accept those, correct? So we'll do X, Y, B for blur, or we'll just type in blur to make it understandable. And then finally, the last one is going to be color. So Moz box shadow is going to just simply X, Y, blur, color. And all I'll do here is copy that, paste that in, and once again the exact same thing for box shadow. So now all we have to do is call shadow, pass in our values, and it'll automatically apply this for us, so we don't have to manually do it every time. So let's create a new box. I'm going to get rid of that anchor tag, and we'll create a div with an ID of box, and I'm just going to hard code something here since it's not important. Style equals width 200 pixels, background red, height is 200 pixels. Come back, refresh the page. There we go, and now we have our box. So we want to apply the box shadow to the div with an ID of box, right? So we're going to bring it down here, we're going to do box, and rather than pasting those values in, we're just going to do plus shadow to call the function. But we need to apply, we could have done it up here where it had default values, but we're going to pass it in here. So the X offset, we're going to push it to the right about 1 pixel, and then we're going to push it down 1 pixel, and I want the blur to be around 3 pixels, and I want the color of the shadow to be kind of a lighter shade of black. And let's see how that works for us. Okay, and now hopefully you can see on this lower resolution we have a nice shadow that was applied, and all we had to do was call the function shadow, and it did it for us. Now it's important to remember those values are still going to be added as if you copied and pasted. So if I refresh, you'll see that the values were added right here. Nevertheless, it's very, very cool. Things I want to show you now are built-in mixins. So you have these that you can create, and I encourage you to do so. But with that said, CSS Scaffold comes with a plethora of built-in functions. So let's say, once again, we're going to separate this, and we have, I don't know, best way to do this, ID equals main, and let's see, we'll do div sidebar and a div of, I don't know, full, something random. And what I'm going to do here is float this one to the left. What I want to do is make it so that the main is taking up no space, and we'll go over this shortly. And style equals float right. And now what we're going to do is give this the main. And the reason I'm embedding it is because it's not important. It's just to demonstrate. Sidebar main. Okay, so we have floated it to the left and floated main to the right, but how come the red, or let's change it to green, why is the green background not showing up? And the reason is, I've gone over this so many times, when you float all of the children of a parent, the parent seemingly takes up no space because they have been floated. A common fix is to apply overflow hidden, and that will force it to, and now you can see the green background. However, there's definitely times when overflow will not solve your problem. Maybe you're in a situation where you need it to overflow in certain parts. Maybe you need an element to wrap over the border of a container or something like that, in which you have to use something called the clear fix hack. So what is the clear fix hack? The clear fix is usually you'll see something with a class of like clear fix, and off the top of my head, if I can remember it, usually I have some kind of snippet that I paste in. But you add some content, and then you set the display to block, and I think the visibility to hidden, and then you want to make sure you apply that overflow trick, or you can leave that off if you want. Font size, this is one found for certain browsers. Set the font size to 0, and I think the last one would be set the height to 0. Anyhow, when you apply that class, it'll force it to contain as children. So if I get rid of this, so you would set that class, and that would allow you to clear its children. But wouldn't it be easier if then, rather than having to do that yourself, you could create your own mixin or use one of the built-in mixins that are provided for you? So I'm going to click on the framework mixins, and you see here are all the built-in mixins for you. And you can see they're just CSS files. So here, this is the quick clear fix, which simply provides overflow hidden. And here's another one, equals clear fix, just like we did before. It has layout by setting the display to block, and then it sets the element in the after, which is how you set the content and the display, etc. Now let's see if we can do it ourselves. So let's go back to style.css. I'm going to get rid of that because we will not need it. And I called the div main. So I'm going to do main. And all we're going to do is call plus clear fix. And there you go. It's been done. So literally, when we called that, it pasted in the appropriate information. It set the zoom to 1. That's another one that's important to give it has layout. And then main after, it sets the content, display, height, visibility, all for you. You didn't have to do anything except call a function. Pretty amazing. There are so many different mixins you can do here. You can set the you can set a box shadow. I told you this one is created for us. You can use any of these. All you have to do is within your property, you set plus and then the name of it. So plus box shadow, and pass in any parameters that you'd like. You can set the opacity, and this is the foolproof setting opacity for an element. And you can see we can set opacity, which works in like Firefox and Safari. Moz opacity is for older versions of Firefox. Opera MS filter is for IE8. Filter is for older versions, and that does it for you. So once again, if you had box and you wanted to set the opacity to something like 0.7, rather than doing, or 0.8, 0.7, rather than pasting all of these in, all you would do is you would do plus opacity, obviously within your real style sheet, not here, but plus opacity, and pass in your values, 0.7, and bam, it does it for you Really, really cool. I'm not going to go over all of these, but I do encourage you to take some time and just look over all of these that are provided for you. It's going to save you hours and hours of time with every new project, I promise you. The next thing I want to teach you is it has grids built in that you can set up for yourself. So what we'll do here is I'm going to close all tabs. Won't save any of these. Close that one. And let's create a new file. And I'm going to call it grid.html. Once again, I'm going to give the title of my grid and make sure that we refer to css/style.css. Okay, so what we're going to do here is create the basis of a grid. So normally when you would reference like 960GS, you would download the files. Here you can kind of have it built in for you. So let's get started. I'm going to do div container and then a child of div sidebar, and it's also going to have another one of div main, something like that. And once again, let's just give the sidebar main, and let's view that page. Okay, there we have it. So how can, out of the box, we set it up for a grid? Okay, well, it has some things built in. So let's go back to style.css, and at the very top, or let's do it one below, right here. I'm going to do grid. So layout module. And we're going to use the 960. So how can we set this up? We're going to do @ grid, and we're going to set our parameters. So we're going to do the column width. These are the values for 960. So the column width of each column is 60 pixels. There are 12 columns in the 960 framework, and it has a width of 960 pixels. So 12 column count is going to be 12. Left gutter width is 10. Right gutter. And the gutter, if you guys don't do print, it's just the spacing between each column, and works at baseline to 18. Okay, so if you can't remember that, you have an option here, and let me see if I can find it. Grids 960GS. It's saved there for you that you can use. Okay, so don't worry if you need to memorize that. It's all set up for you. So out of the box, that's not going to do anything for you. If I refresh the page, though, go to the very bottom, this new class of show grid was added. So what is that? Well, it looks like it's referencing a background image. So let's check it out. Let's go back to grid.html and apply it. So class equals show, and if I can remember, if you had a capital, show grid, all lowercase. Now check this out. This is pretty neat. Refresh, and now your grid has been created for you. Okay, so we can do more. It's been set up for the grid, but we haven't created the classes that we need to do so, right? Well, normally when you're working with 960, you have to apply all of these totally unsemantic classes of like container 12 is what you would do with 960. And, usually I would make it more understandable for me just by adding an ID that was much more semantic and just allowing the class and just taking it. And then with your sidebar, you would have a class of maybe grid 3, and main would be grid 9. And that's how you would have your layout, right? Okay, well, once again, with CSS Scaffold, we can fix this, and we don't even have to add these classes. We can reference it directly just using these normal semantic elements and IDs. So what we're going to do here is reference these. So let's first begin by setting our container element. So we'll do container, and all we're going to do here is plus container. Okay, so if this is confusing for you, remember all of these functions, if you forget them, are available within the mixin. So we're going to do mixin, and let me see if I can find it, grid.css, and here are all the functions that you have available to you. So if you scroll down, here's one function, container, and you can see right there it applies the clear fix hat. It sets the width, and remember, it doesn't have to be 960. You can set these grids up to anything you want, but by default it will be set to the 960. It sets the margins to auto to center the thing on the website on the page, and it of course sets the position to relative. So that's what we're going to call right now, plus container. Come back, and now if we did it correctly, you should see the sidebar in the main when we refresh the page switch to the center. And now it has. I'm on a low resolution, so you didn't see a difference, but if I zoom out, you can totally see that it has been zoomed in on the page. So to get a better feel, let's give it a background of red. And now you can see, once again, if I zoom out, we've automatically set it without adding any classes, without downloading any files. We have set a grid, and you can see it lines up. Okay, so what next? We have children, so if I want to do the grid 3 of the sidebar, let's do sidebar. And this one, we're going to use something called columns. So remember, once again, if you can't find it, you can set all of these that you should check out. Here's columns, and all it does is it creates the column base. So what's column base? It sets the position to relative, it floats them to the left, it sets the margin left and right. Okay, so we're going to do, got to call the function, so remember to apply the plus in columns, and we're going to give it, let's do 4. Okay. Refresh, and let's also give it a background color just so you can see better. There you go. So now we've applied it, and it's only taking up 4 grids. Cool. Also, if we come back and we get rid of this class and instead apply it, and of course I need to come down and make sure I don't override that, so I'll get rid of that. And now you can see that it does line up much better. Okay, so we're going to do a couple more things here. Just because I have no content, I'm going to set the height to 400 pixels. And now you can see that it is taking up 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do another one. Now we have main. So let's do I have main up here anywhere else from an older project? Yeah, I have it right there, but that's okay. So we're going to do main. And this one, we're going to do columns, and we need to get it up to 12 because we're working with 960. We're going to do 12 columns, background. Once again, something that stands out, orange, and a height of 400 pixels only because we have no content. Ta-da! And now we have our full project, so we can continue doing this as much as we want. If we wanted to continue doing a div class equals, I don't know, I'm just going to give it a class of call, and lorem. What I'm going to do is copy that 3 times, and let's actually do it 4 times. And now if I want each of those to display equally 1, 2, 3, 4, we just need to apply that. So at the bottom, what did I call it? Call plus columns, and I want each of those to be 12 divided by 4 equals 3, background yellow. Once again, and height, actually no, we already have text there, so let's add it in, and there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you can see here if you want to zero out the margins, with 960 you have alpha and omega. I believe here you have first and last, and you can see here that sets margin left to 0 and margin right to 0. So if we wanted to do something like here, container sidebar, we could also give it a class of first. I'm sorry, what am I thinking? We would go back to style, and we could do sidebar first. And now that zeroes out that one, and if you wanted to do the same thing for the main, for some reason, last. Okay? But I'm going to get rid of those for the time being, and refresh the page, and then you're free to play around with these if you want. Now, the reason these aren't lining up, as you can see, is I made a mistake. We need to come back and make sure that container is actually wrapping those. And now you can see that everything does line up correctly, and we are creating a grid without downloading any files. We're doing it all from CSS scaffold. So that's really pretty much been your introduction. There's more to do. There's so many different modules that you need to take a look at. And the great thing is it's really easy to understand. Any of these mixins that you have here, you can play around with. Multi-column width. Remember, if you want to work with any of these within your properties, just do plus column width and maybe something like 50 or something like that. Play around with all of them. Then you have these grids that are built in. So if you want a generic grid, here is the blueprint that you would use. Here's the 960. And remember, what you do there is you add it to the very top of your page. Now, additionally, the last thing I want to show you is it has support for nested elements. So if you had like container, and then you had something like P, this would automatically, once the CSS file was created, make that refer to container P. Now with that said, I'm kind of old-fashioned. I would really prefer to keep it traditional. That way it's easier for me to wrap my head around, but do know that you have that option available to you. So please do check out the documentation, because it goes into quite a bit of detail and it shows you, let's just copy that. I'm going to add a link to this within the posting that you're free to look over, and it goes over everything in detail for the parts that I didn't cover. So I really do think if you'll take the time and learn this mixed with the Zen coding tutorial that we had last Friday, it's going to speed up your development time enormously. So let me know what you guys think, and let me know your thoughts. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.